Hi, friends. Jeff Harmon here with a new episode of Conversations That Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. I'm thrilled today to welcome Karen Zaderej. Karen is the CEO of Axogen, where they are putting patients first to revolutionize the science of nerve repair. Over the time that I've gotten to know Karen, who she is to me is commitment. Commitment to patients, commitment to her team, commitment to herself and her well-being, and commitment to the future and what will be left behind when her time at Axogen ends in the future. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. We get to know Karen, and she gives some sage advice to other CEOs who are walking this path. Karen, welcome. It is really exciting to have you. I know even before we hit record here, we were connecting about what our summers have been like. And so I've been so eager for our conversation and to dive into who you are and what you're up to in the world, how you see the world. So just so excited and welcome to our conversation.
Thank you, Jeff. Glad to be here. Happy to have a conversation and talk a little bit about myself and about Axogen, the company that I lead currently.
Yeah. So why don't you start there? Just tell us a little bit more so our listeners can get to know you. Tell us a little bit more about what you're up to in the world.
Sure. Well, I'm really passionate about advancing healthcare. That's the thing that I wake up every day and think, how can we have patient outcomes be better and more impactful for their quality of life? And Axogen was founded with that goal in mind, focused on injuries to peripheral nerves. So think of peripheral nerves as the wires of your body. And when those wires are cut or damaged, it affects function of the body. And it can be anything from moving your arms or your hand to sensation of a part of a body, or even where nerves are healing badly, they're a source of chronic pain. And of course, we know today that that can lead to significant dependencies on pharmaceuticals, which have huge detrimental impacts to the whole life and as well as the family. And so we're very patient-centric. We really study and think of what can we do to improve patient lives. And we do this with some advanced technologies to help surgeons repair peripheral nerves in new and innovative ways.
And Axogen is in the midst of celebrating two things, 20 years of being in existence and 9 years of being listed on the NASDAQ. Is that right?
Yeah. So 20 years since we were founded, which is it's amazing to me the time has gone by so quickly. But healthcare doesn't move quickly in the end because you want to make sure that you've done all the right studies and data and safety to make sure that things are impactful on patients. We actually had our first clinical implants early on in 2007. And we've built out clinical data and commercial execution today such that we impact patients in traumatic injuries, in when women have a mastectomy and breast reconstruction to allow her to have sensation, as well as the restoration of shape of breasts. And as I mentioned, work in chronic pain. So those are all really exciting areas, but there's more to be done. So we did list on NASDAQ a number of years ago. It takes quite a bit of capital to be able to fund all of that development work, as well as building out the company. And we're happy to be on NASDAQ as a public company and continue to be able to grow the business and provide a return to those shareholders as well.
Well, congratulations to you and your team. Those are really exciting milestones. One of the things we like to do on the show is to get behind the curtain with our guests, and so that we can really get to know a little bit more about you than just by your profile picture or your bio on the website. And the way we do that is through the three H's. And the three H's are your hero, a hardship, and a highlight. Could you share with us your response to each one of those?
Yeah, I can. I think my hero is actually my grandmother. Not somebody that everybody knows, but my grandmother was one of the most tenacious women I have ever met. She was clearly the matriarch of our family. She lived to be just shy of 100 years old. Through that entire time, she lived on her own or in her own home. My grandfather had passed away many years before she eventually passed away. She stayed very current with the family, kept us all very connected, felt that family and relationships were critically important, but also taught us a sense of values and doing good, honest, hard work to be able to achieve your goals. So, maybe not the splashy figure that many people might list as a hero, but I look at what my grandmother did and what she accomplished in her life, and I hope someday to be similar to what she did.
What's your earliest memory of recognizing the wisdom and the example of your grandmother?
She was very much about supporting her community and expanding her impact in that community. And so one of the things that she decided that she would do is to support elections, that she would cook all the meals for the election sites. And so she gathered up all of her friends in the neighborhood, and they baked, and these are very home style meals, like chicken pot pie and homemade pies. And they would be baking and working all week long leading up to an election. But for her, it was around supporting the process and the community of that, and making that go better by making sure that everybody who worked at an election poll had a home cooked meal. And they did that for free for, 40 years, long time.
Wow. It just strikes me of the word servant leader comes up, someone who is supporting those, maybe not noted as a leader on the outside, but someone who is equipping and supporting others for them to do their good work.
Yeah. And that's a good description of my grandmother. She didn't necessarily want to be out in front, but she wanted to make sure that what she thought was important in terms of family, community, that was supported and running well. And she put her efforts behind that belief.
So what about hardship or highlight? You can take whichever one first.
Yeah, from a hardship standpoint, I think in the early days of Axogen, I was probably tested more than I have been in any other role, both personally and professionally. Axogen was a true startup company. It was a spin out of technology from the University of Florida. We incubated the technology in an incubator. As I said, it's a long haul for clinical and development work of medical products, worthwhile, but a long journey. And it takes a lot of resources, both talent and capital, to be able to move forward. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we had our first clinical implants in 2007. And if you remember, in 2008, there was a pretty substantial financial impact to the marketplace with a recession. And our venture capital backers at the time said, well, we think this is going to be a long haul. And we're only going to fund our commercially viable companies today. And so there'll be no more money for you. And I had a dedicated team. We had really good preliminary data and a strong belief that this was an impactful therapy for patients, in particular at the time the Iraq and Afghanistan war was going on. And wounded warriors would have an IED explosion with many limbs impacted. And there is a significant quality of life. If you lose your legs, you need to be able to use your hands so that you can operate a wheelchair, so that you can be mobile. And I was very determined that those wounded warriors, as well as other patients, but for me, the wounded warriors became the focal point, that they should have the opportunity to have repair. And so that this became sort of my personal banner to say, how do I raise money in this recession in a way that will keep this clinical work going and continue to fund the company in an environment where there's just, everybody said there's no money available. And it was a very difficult time. I actually believed I should be very transparent with the company. So I got the team together every Friday and said how many weeks of payroll we still had left. And we talked about what it meant for people personally if they needed to leave because they were concerned about the financial insecurity of the business, but we were very transparent about it. Most people stayed, thankfully. So we were able to continue with the talent we needed, and it was up to me to go raise the financial resources that we needed. And I did that through some very, very difficult work. But overcoming my own fear, I went to high net worth individuals directly. And so it's a little bit of the cold calling fear of, wow, if I call this, family that has a high profile name that people might have heard of before, why would they take my call? But I found that they did. They were very generous to listen. And they also, in many cases, had a passion to make sure that fair healthcare was provided to these wounded warriors. And we were able to fund the company through that difficult time until we could go public and be, in a much more comfortable situation today. So I think that tested me to the depths, both leading a team that was a little bit, scared about their financial security and were they doing the right thing personally for them and their families, as well as overcoming my own fear to just push through scary things, but to meet a goal and to do it in a way that would be successful. So that was probably the most challenging that we had that I hope I don't have to do over and over again, but I'm happy to say it built my resilience in being able to do that.
I'm going to just jump in here before we get to highlight, because there's so much there that we can learn from. What was it that enabled you to have the courage to get your team together every Friday and talk about the hard facts of payroll and sort of overcome those fears? What was it that you can attribute that what you were able to do and during that really difficult time?
I think for me, it's a style of leadership of being providing very clear and transparent, both a vision of where we need to go, because I think we all shared a common vision. Have been passionate about what that vision is from the beginning of this journey. And the people who are here believe in that vision and want to see their personal impact in that vision as well. So for me, it's being clear about the vision, but then also being transparent about the risks and willing to discuss some hard topics with people one-on-one. If people were worried about, am I going to be able to make the mortgage payment? I invited people to say, come talk to me. Come talk. Don't be afraid to come and talk to me about it. If you're worried, let's talk through it together. You won't hurt my feelings by telling me something that might be disappointing that you have to leave the organization, because I understand, but let's do that change together so that it'll be minimizing the disruption to the organization. And I think people appreciated the support and information, but also bought into the long-range vision of the organization.
You haven't said once the word culture, but it just strikes me that there's a phrase that I use with clients and I use for myself, that values aren't your values until they're tested. And so I just can imagine that this was so formative to the culture that grew out of that, because this was early days. And so the culture that grew out of this, all the behavior, all the showing up as a leader that you just talked about, I have to imagine that this test really shaped the culture of the organization. Is that what did you see flow out in terms of the culture, how other people showed up, how they behaved? What did you see there?
Yeah, I think culture is very important to our organization and to me. I think, and as our values, to me, values are the guardrails of the organization. It's the things that we articulate that say how we're going to get to that vision that we have down the road with really things that we will and will not do, and how we achieve that vision. And so actually we had even earlier than that point, had gotten together when we realized, and this sounds funny, but we said, oh my goodness, we're going to double in size. We had 12 people and we had a plan that said we were going to go to 25, right? So that seemed like an enormous step up for us as a tiny, tiny fledgling company. And we decided that we should write down what our values are so that when we're hiring people, we can be very straightforward to say, here's what our values are. Not to say one value is good or bad, but this is what we as an organization want to do. And so we had them, we call them our axogenic values. We already had those in place. And that's part of what helped us with the transparency, because we talk about how we treat each other with respect. And to me, part of respect was being honest with the full team of all levels to be able to say, this is the situation that we're in, and then to work together to resolve issues. And so we talk about collaboration in our values. We have other things in our values too. We talk about have fun. We spend a lot of time together. We want to have fun together. And of course, I talked about patients being our first priority. That's a direct statement from our value statement. So I think the time period that was such a hardship tested those values and showed that they had merit, that we live them, and they are how we want to continue to be as an organization. They still exist today. And again, that was 2008. Here we are many years into the future, and we've changed a couple of words over the years. We do an update now and then, but we haven't really dramatically changed them because I think they still provide those guardrails and exemplify how we work together in a good way. We did a good job of documenting what we thought was most important for the organization.
And how have you seen that become your guardrails, your values, and the culture that flows out of it? How have you seen that become a differentiator for Axogen?
I think one of the biggest things is that clear focus. There are lots of stakeholders in any organization, and we are really clear that the first and foremost group that we consider is patients. And yet patients don't buy our products. Sometimes they don't even know that our products were used, right? It's surgery. So they just know that they got hurt and they went to a hospital or to a surgery center and they got fixed. So they don't know that they have Axogen as part of their healing, but we know it. And so we really try and make sure that we keep that patient voice front and center. We bring patients in for company meetings to tell their journey. We want patients, not only the patient themselves, but their family. Because when you have an impact to a peripheral nerve, very often there are accommodations that your family may have to make as well. So how can we understand that condition, and how can we continue to make their lives better so that patients get better and better outcomes? We also bring a patient in to talk before every one of my board meetings so that the board also keeps patients front and center. We think, again, if that's our value, we want to start with that so that we frame everything else we think about as how do we continue to make the patient life better.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing us to is this secret sauce. It's not so secret anymore, but around culture and your deep commitments to one another as peers and team members, your commitment to your primary stakeholder, and allowing that to be at the front and center. And I would imagine that has served you well in terms of the results that the other stakeholders, not the patient, but of the other stakeholders, shareholders, the board, that they've seen. I'm imagining that they've seen the impact on why they're showing up. I imagine that they've seen the impact of that too.
Yeah, I think by focusing so clearly on patients, it's actually allowed us to see possibilities of ways that we can help patients that I don't think we would have seen before, and certainly weren't part of the broader conversation in healthcare prior to this. Obviously, clinicians play an important role. It's not just what we as Axogen do, but if I look in total over the 20 years that Axogen has been around, originally, if you talked about the issues of peripheral nerve, we talked more about the mechanics, not the impact on patients. And so they were thought about more for things like traumatic injuries. But as I mentioned, breast reconstruction, it wasn't really even considered that women should have sensation in their breasts when they had a reconstruction. And for the woman, it's important to be able to have sensation because it allows you to be normal again. You want to go back to pre-cancer. You want to be back to as much of normalcy as you can. And by listening to women and hearing what they said, we learned that the biggest thing that wasn't normal is when they hugged their children, they couldn't feel them. And that's really a big emotional impact. And we want to be able to have that, again, normalcy. So we've surfaced that with a program we call Resensation that educates women to be able, if they're in the situation of having a mastectomy, needing to think about, and there's many decisions you have to make, but one of them is sensation important to you? And if it is, then ask your physician about it. Find a physician who does the resensation technique to restore sensation. Just providing that educational tool helps women be advocates for their own health, which is, I think, ultimately the best answer, because not one answer fits everybody, but you can get the right answer for you. And that's what we're trying to do in all of these healthcare situations.
And you're reminding me of a fact that you pointed to when we had our prep call. In this case, the woman is the patient, but you pointed me to the truth that females are often the primary health decision maker in a family, in a marriage. I can imagine a male veteran comes back, as you pointed to, a wounded veteran, that the partner, the wife, the spouse is a decision maker. And I'm wondering, for you as a female CEO, that must put you in a very unique place to be able to empathize with that role that so many women have to play.
Yeah, no, it is. Depending on studies that you look at, about 70% of healthcare decisions are made by the female of the household. And so very much the female of a household is really learning and driving the healthcare decisions for the family in total, not just for her own health. And yet, if you look at healthcare executives, by far and away, they're male. And I think we miss opportunities to understand what's really important to the patient by not having that female voice in many of those decisions. Now, I'm not alone in that. I think many healthcare companies are starting to make sure that their DEI initiatives are broad, but in particular looking at this gender component to make sure that they're getting the proper voice and representation of who their customers ultimately are. And an example of that actually is our breast reconstruction opportunity. Again, it happens that I have breast cancer in my family, so I'm fairly familiar with the condition for women. And I was asked by two family members who'd had a reconstruction and were comfortable to come to me and to say, I'm numb, when do I get sensation back? And I think they were comfortable to do that because I'm both family and female. And we went out and interviewed surgeons about it and found that there was a very significant gender difference, that female surgeons had these conversations with their female patients. But very often women didn't bring this up at all to their male surgeons. So the male surgeons didn't have an idea or even know that their patients felt a loss of this sensation. And so clearly gender can make a difference both in hearing and receiving information because of your comfort level of communicating it, and then being awareness of the impact of that. Again, that nurturing component for women. So we think it's important that women have a voice in healthcare and in healthcare organizations.
And yeah, what a gift for you to be in the seat that you are. And I'm sure lots of women who aren't CEOs can also have an impact And I so appreciate you shining this light for us, because we operate our own tunnels, our own myopic view, and so to have a leader like you, not only in the breast sensation, but I would imagine that there's a unique perspective that you bring as a female CEO to even your team, that women that you employ, men as well, are able to see this unique perspective. Is that something, or is that a sort of an unintended consequence that you see, the impact on your team? Or is it something that you really put attention on, of expanding perspective and seeing things from other people's view?
Well, I always struggle answering some of these questions because my view has always been as a female CEO. So I don't know if it's different than a male CEO because I've never been a male CEO. But what I can say is that it is very apparent to me. Remember, I said companies need resources, they need capital, and they need talent. And our talent needs to be diverse. Again, if we're keeping that patient front and center, we need to be able to think about and represent a broad sets of patient lives and lifestyles. We need to be able to recruit a broad talent base to be able to have the best of the best. And so for me, it's always just been very obvious that we have to continue to grow the diversity of our team if we're really going to be able to recruit the best talent. We still have lots of opportunity to do that. I'm a female-led company, but we're not 50% female in the company. And so we have opportunities here to continue to improve it. But I think awareness is the first step. We want to make sure that we are recruiting in a way that brings in the best talent, but also a good diverse mix of talent so that we get the best perspectives, and perspectives help us make the best decision. Different perspectives help us make the best decision.
Yeah, such an important conversation. I just realized we never got your highlight. So I actually want to, and maybe it's baked into everything we've already talked about, but yeah, I would love to circle back and hear for you, what's a highlight that you could point to in your life?
There have been a lot, so it's actually hard to pick a highlight. But if I think about some of the things that have changed my life, there's actually a particular patient who probably changed my life more than all the rest. And her name is Shirley. She's actually on our website if people want to go see a little bit more about her story. But Shirley was suffering from chronic pain in her foot. And she went to go see all kinds of physicians to try and resolve the pain. They amputated some toes. They did surgery on her hammer toe. The pain escalated and got to a point that she actually went to a physician to ask him to amputate her foot. She couldn't function as a professional because of the medication she was taking. She was in constant pain. And he said, wait, we're looking at this new thing around the nerves. Let me evaluate you for that before we do this pretty dramatic step. And they found that she had 3 neuromas. And a neuroma is where the nerve fibers tangle up in a scar and crosstalk and send static back to the brain that the brain interprets as pain. That's the piece of chronic pain that I'm talking about that we can help fix. There's a fairly simple solution of cutting out that bad section of nerve that removes that static going back to the brain, and then they need to do something to manage that nerve, and that's where our products come in. So the surgeon removed the pain by cutting out those neuromas, and Shirley describes it. Now remember, she just woke up from surgery. She describes it as like someone turned on the lights, because all of a sudden, all the pain that she had been suffering from that was so immense that she felt like the lights were on and she could see again because she didn't have all that fog of pain. And I thought that was such a good description. She's the first patient I met who had this issue with neuroma and chronic pain. And we've been on quite a journey over the last, oh goodness, probably 7 or 8 years, working on pain as a significant part of the work that we do. Because I think there are a lot of people out there like Shirley who are really in a desperate situation, and she just never lost hope. She continued to see physician after physician trying to find a solution. And these particular neuromas are, they're very difficult to resolve with drugs or other options. And yet, I think we have a way that can help those patients. So that's probably a highlight for me of a lasting, durable legacy that I think will be able to help patients with all kinds of peripheral nerve injuries, but in particular, people like Shirley.
Yeah, it really just highlights for me the power of story and sharing your story with others. And while you weren't hands-on with Shirley, so to speak, her sharing her story was transformational. I can hear it in your voice. It was really transformational, and as you named it, a highlight in your life. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I actually keep a picture of Shirley in my office as a reminder of that.
Now, one thing we talked about, a little bit of change in subject, was you just had a big vacation, and we joked about that as we were preparing for our call, how that would be for you, being largely off the grid. I mean, there was means to stay connected, but largely off the grid in Central Africa. And I'm curious about the journey for this vacation, but maybe just taking your hands off the wheel, how that is for you, taking time off, stepping away, empowering the team. Tell us a little about your journey of getting more and more comfortable in doing that.
Yeah, I think it's both the company growing up and my comfort in letting go contributed. So I just came back from a 2-week safari in Kenya, where I really was off the grid for the most part, and unable to participate except in an emergency. So we did have a backup emergency plan, and I had a satellite phone with me. I am, first of all, very proud that Axogen and the team have grown to the point that I was given the opportunity to have this really phenomenal vacation. I'm an avid photographer, and this was a chance of a lifetime to do some amazing photography. And so certainly enjoyed the vacation, but it was also a proud moment for me to see how far we've come. For those of you who haven't been involved in a startup, Axogen was a startup company. So in the startup days, you have a team of a handful of people, and I was literally on call for everything. You wear multiple hats in a startup. You are resolving all kinds of issues, and you're also creating things day to day because you don't have any infrastructure. So you have to create your infrastructure. You have to create your vision for the organization, but then you have to do practical things too, like, process payroll and run lab experiments and do all kinds of things. And we went over the years from that to hiring in and building a team that could then manage the tasks. And there was management more involved in the exception management for problems and crisis management for problems. And then going beyond that to now having an executive team that can manage a crisis and manage it quite well, and let me know what happened. Yeah. So it's nice to see going from sort of the infancy of a company to the toddler years, the teen years, and now what I would say is really fully functioning as a management and executive team.
You clearly, as you pointed to, the competency and the capacity of your team growing up, and you also pointed to your ability to let go. I'm wondering what has been critical for you, because I talk to a lot of CEOs who have very capable teams, yet they still have a difficult time letting go. And so I'm wondering if you could share the mindset journey that you had in getting to the point where you could go off go off the grid, let go, turn off the computer for the weekend, or whatever the context. What's been your journey of letting go?
Yeah, it is a journey. I think it starts with, for me, a commitment that I believe that we're building a long-term sustainable company. And that means it needs to be durable after me. And so I have that as a personal vision and goal, that this is not just something that we'll build and flip and immediately sell to somebody else. We could, that might ultimately be an option, but our plan is to build a sustainable entity really focused in again, impacting patients' lives with peripheral nerve injuries. And to do that, that means I have to change. And so that's not always easy to be able to do that. But I recognize that I was an impediment to growth if I didn't change. And I was an impediment to that long-term goal if I didn't change. And so I would recommend to others who are in that situation, get a coach. I've gotten a coach that helps me sort of play through things to think about, well, what's right and wrong? What should I be letting go of? I actually, at one point, I'm kind of analytical. I decided I would write down every decision that I made and realized some of those are kind of dumb. I mean, I didn't need to be doing it. And so then proactively said, don't send these to me, and started telling people to stop sending me certain decisions. Having said that, there are also things that I know my staff would say, I got this, I can take care of it. And I'm looking going, yeah, I don't think you actually have just yet, but let's work on these. What's important to me is to identify, here's why I don't think you have it just yet. And here's the 2 or 3 things I need to see so that they can grow and develop. So it is an ongoing dialogue, not just me hanging on to the reins, but to recognize that there are still some places that I see that I add value that frankly, I'd rather not. I'd be happy if they could take it and run with it, but I have a perspective that they haven't learned, and I want them to learn it. And so I think those are good, healthy development conversations. And like I said, we've been having those, and that allowed me to have this fabulous vacation with great management while I was gone. And for the long term, helps both the succession planning of the organization and the longevity of the organization to continue to be successful.
Well done. And you said the word awareness earlier in our conversation. It just sounds like there's been a growing and a developing self-awareness, awareness of environment, just more and more eyes wide open of what's the truth of the matter. And it sounds like that's been really key to your development as a leader, as a leader who's able to let go. That feels really, really central to that journey.
Yeah, and it doesn't always comfortable. So you just have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Yeah. So that's part of the journey too, is to recognize when you're talking about yourself and you have to change, that means you're going to find things that aren't right, and that's sometimes uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that takes us to the last question for our conversation today is if you could go back, whether it's pre-CEO or maybe even you were the COO for a time, if you could go back to an earlier stage before you were at that executive level and pull yourself aside and have a conversation with her, what would that conversation entail?
Be brave. So I think, and I do think this is a gender tendency, I think women tend to think that they need to get all the skills they need before they aspire to be the CEO. And so I aspired to have broad leadership and management, but I kept thinking I needed to get one more thing and one more thing. And I'm not sure, as I look back, that I needed to do that. I was probably ready to start the journey that I've been on in running Axogen 5 or 6 years before I did, but I wasn't brave enough to do it without having this very complete list of competencies and skills. And so I would just say, if you're really entrepreneurial and you believe that you're entrepreneurial and you want to try something in this startup world of building a business, you got to first recognize you got to be brave. And so that would be the advice to myself.
Yeah, I love that, because it really points to this distinction around confidence and bravery. Confidence, as I've come to see it as a result, the only requirement is bravery or courage. And so I love pointing your younger self to that, but also for those that are listening that are on a similar journey, pointing them to that. It's so powerful and really important.
Great.
So we're at the end of our conversation, Karen, and before we wrap, I would love for you to share with us where we can learn more about you. Where can those that are listening connect, learn more about Axogen? How can we do that?
Well, I mentioned, first of all, we're always patient-centric. So there's some things that are educational tools for patients on breast reconstruction called resensation.com, on nerve pain, Rethink Pain. Those are both very helpful websites for patients. And then AxogenInc.com has both my bio and some background information, as well as a lot of information about Axogen.
Great. And we'll put all that in the show notes so that those that find it have some pointers on where to go to get that information. Karen, this has been a lot of fun and so helpful for me, even just to learn and broaden my own awareness and perspective on the world. So thank you for the gift of this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. I enjoyed the time.